Well now, here we are again. You just settle yourself in, nice and easy. Pull the blanket up if you need it. Get your pillow sorted the way you like it. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to be. Just be here. Just breathe. That's all that's asked of you tonight. I'm going to tell you a story, a long one, a slow one that goes all the way back through the years, back through the decades, back through all the seasons between then and now, all the way back to a particular summer. A summer that was different from all the others. A summer that I have carried around with me warm and whole, like a smooth stone in a coat pocket, for more years than I care to count. It was the summer we had no school. Now you might hear that and think, well, every summer has no school. That's what summer is. And you'd be right, technically. Every summer, school stops, and the children run out into the light like something uncorked, like something that was held under pressure all winter and spring and finally let go. I know that kind. I know the ordinary kind of summer with no school, but this was different. This was the summer the school closed. Let me tell you how it happened. Let me go back to the beginning of it, to the very first day of knowing, and then I'll take you through the whole long, beautiful, strange thing, from that first morning to the last evening, from the first week to the last, from the beginning of a summer that seemed like it might be endless to the moment it ended, and we all understood, in the way that children come slowly to understand things, that it had been something. It had been something that you don't get twice. But first, before I go back there, let me just sit here with you a moment. Let me just let the quiet settle in. The night is soft tonight. I can hear, just barely, the sound of the wind in the trees outside. A slow wind, not in a hurry. The kind that moves through the branches without disturbing them too much. Just a gentle conversation between the air and the leaves. I like that sound. I've liked it all my life. It's one of those sounds that's just right, whatever the hour. There's a light on in the hallway, a low one, enough to see by if you need to, not so much that it interrupts the dark. The dark of a good night is something I've learned to appreciate. Not a hard dark, not a frightening one, just the regular dark of the world resting. The dark that has stars in it, up above all the clouds and the rooftops. That dark is a friend. It holds things. It quiets things. It lets the mind go soft. So, the summer we had no school. I was 9 years old. 9 years and, let me think, 9 years and 2 months when the summer started. Small for my age, as I've always been. Skinny, with sharp elbows and knees that collected bruises the way other things collect dust. My hair was too long because my mother had been meaning to take me to the barber for 3 weeks and hadn't gotten around to it, so it sat on my head in a way that could most generously be described as haphazard. I had a gap where one of my teeth had recently departed and the new one was taking its time about arriving. In other words, I was a perfectly ordinary 9-year-old boy, one of several in our neighborhood, one of a whole school full of them, one of many in a world that is never short of perfectly ordinary 9-year-old boys. The school I attended was a red brick building at the end of our street. Not a big school, maybe 200 children in total spread across several classrooms and several grades. It had a yard of cracked concrete where we played at recess, and a flagpole in the front with a rope that clattered against it in the wind, and double doors of heavy dark wood at the entrance that always smelled of floor polish and chalk dust, even in summer. even when the doors were propped open. I had walked into those doors 5 days a week for 4 years by then. I knew every crack in the playground concrete. I knew which steps on the main staircase creaked and in what sequence. I knew that the water from the fountain outside the gymnasium was always too cold in winter and never quite cold enough in summer. I knew the smell of the building, that particular school smell that I suspect is universal, that mixture of chalk and cleaning products and paper, and the warm wool smell of many children in coats in winter, and the grass and sweat smell of many children recently come in from the yard in summer. It was my school, the way a place becomes yours, not through owning it, but through being shaped by it. I had been shaped by it, and in June of that particular year, just before the summer would have started in any case, I came home one afternoon, and my mother was in the kitchen with a letter in her hand and a certain expression on her face. Not worried exactly, not angry, a thoughtful expression, the kind that means something has happened that requires a moment of adjustment. "The school is closing," she said, before I'd even put down my bag. I looked at her. "For the summer?" "For longer," she said. "There's some problem with the building. With the roof, they think, and some pipes. They're closing it for repairs. It may take all summer, they say, but it might go longer." I stood in the kitchen doorway holding my bag and looking at my mother. And I want to tell you exactly what I felt, because it matters to the story. I had a feeling that was entirely mixed and difficult to read. On one side of it, the part that was 9 years old and had been inside that building 5 days a week for 4 years. That part felt something like joy, something like the lurch of a stomach on the downward part of a swing, something like the word yes said from the inside. On the other side, and I didn't entirely understand this part until later, until much later, on the other side there was something smaller and quieter, something like uncertainty, like the floor has moved slightly and you're not sure yet if it's going to keep moving or settle back. Because school, whatever I thought of it on any given day, and there were days I thought very little of it, days when the sun was bright outside the windows and the lessons were long and my desk was hard and every minute felt like 10. School was a structure. It was a given. It was the thing that organized the days into a shape. And without it, the days were just days, unorganized, shapeless, endless. That should have been entirely wonderful. And it was. Mostly, it was. But I want to be honest that there was that other thing too, that small uncertainty underneath the joy. Because that's the truth of it. My mother put the letter down on the table. She picked up the kettle. She said, in that voice she had for practical matters, "Well, we'll figure it out." And I went to find my friend Oliver. Oliver. Let me tell you about Oliver, because he's important to this story. Oliver lived 4 houses down from us, in a house that was slightly wider and slightly older than ours, and had a garden that was considerably less organized. His mother grew things, grew them with great enthusiasm and not always great success, and the garden was a sort of ambitious chaos of plants at various stages of thriving and failing, all mixed together, presided over by a large apple tree in the center that was old enough to have been there before the house, or so it seemed. Oliver was 9, too, a month older than me. He was taller than me, but then most people were. He had dark eyes that were always slightly narrowed, like he was working something out. He was the most curious person I have ever known. Curious in the deepest possible way. The way that isn't just about wanting to know facts, but about wanting to understand how things worked, why things were the way they were, what would happen if you did a particular thing to a particular other thing. He was the kind of boy who, given a new object of any kind, would immediately take it apart, if that was possible, and if it wasn't, would turn it over and over in his hands for a very long time until he was satisfied he understood it. Dear Oliver was at his front gate when I came down the street, sitting on top of it the way he sometimes sat, balanced on the top bar, feet hooked through the lower ones, eating an apple from the tree in the garden. He looked at me with those narrowed eyes. "You heard?" he said. "My mom got the letter," I said. He took a bite of the apple. "Whole summer," he said. "Maybe longer?" "Yes." He chewed, looking at nothing in particular. Then he said, "Right. So what do we do first?" That was Oliver. That was precisely Oliver. Not, "What a shame," not, "Isn't that strange," not, "I wonder what will happen." What do we do first? As if the summer were a project to be planned and executed, as if this enormous open space of time were a field that needed to be crossed, and crossing it was a matter of strategy. I climbed up and sat on the gate beside him. We sat there in the evening light, 2 9-year-olds on a gate, eating his apple between us. He gave me half, and talked about the summer. What would we do? Where would we go? What needed doing that we'd been putting off because there was never time. There was always school, always the homework, always the getting up early, and the sitting in rows and the structured thing of it. What had we been meaning to do? The list, as I remember it now, was magnificent in its scope and its impracticality. We were going to build a raft for the creek at the edge of town and float it downstream. We were going to catch a fish, a proper one, not a minnow, from the pond at the back of the fields. We were going to read the entire set of encyclopedias that Oliver's father had bought and never opened. We were going to catalog all the insects in the garden. We were going to find out what was in the old Fenwick place at the end of the lane, which had been empty for as long as we could remember, and had always had a particular quality of mystery. Something in the way the light fell through the dusty windows. We listed these things on the gate in the evening, passing the half-apple back and forth, and the light was golden, the way evening light is golden in early summer, warm and slanted, and the shadows of things were long and soft on the ground. That was the beginning. That was the very first evening of the summer we had no school. Sitting on a gate with my friend Oliver, making plans in the light. Now let me tell you about the first morning. The first proper morning. The first Monday morning when school should have started, but didn't. I woke up, and this is something that I've never quite forgotten, the specific quality of waking up on that first morning. I woke up at the regular time. The time my body had been trained to over 4 years of school mornings. Early, while the light was still slanted and the house was quiet. I lay in bed for a moment, doing what you do on school mornings, the automatic assembling of the upcoming day, getting up, breakfast, the walk down the street, the heavy doors, the first lesson, and then I remembered. No school. The first time I remembered it that summer, the very first time, I felt it differently than I would feel it any subsequent morning. I felt it the way you feel something genuinely new, a looseness, a kind of slow, warm unlocking of the chest. I lay in bed and I thought, I don't have to get up yet. I don't have to go anywhere. The day is mine, entirely mine, from right now until the evening. Mine and Oliver's and whoever else wanted to be part of it. I got up anyway. I was a morning person, am still, despite everything the years have done to me, and I could never quite stay in bed once I was awake, even when I was allowed to. Something in me always wanted to be up and at the day, even when the day had nothing in particular planned for me, maybe especially then. I went downstairs. My father had already left for work. He left early. Always the sound of the front door closing was the earliest sound of our mornings, the first punctuation in the day. My mother was in the kitchen with her tea, reading something at the table. She looked up when I came in and said, "You're up." "Couldn't sleep," I said, which wasn't quite true. I'd slept fine. "No school today," she said. "I know." She looked at me for a moment with the particular look that mothers have when they're thinking more than they're saying. Then, "Breakfast first, then the day is yours." The breakfast that morning was better than school morning breakfast. Not because it was different, it was the same. Toast and butter and a cup of weak tea that I held in both hands the way I'd watched my father hold his. But because there was no clock attached to it, no "have you got your bag," no "hurry up," no "it's getting late," just the toast and the tea and the morning light coming through the kitchen window and my mother reading at the table. Peaceful, that's the word, peacefully unremarkable. I ate, and then I went out. The street was quiet, very early still, earlier than I usually came out in the mornings. The birds were fully at it by then, in fine voice, the full summer chorus of them. We had a row of tall trees at the end of our street, linden trees, lime trees, with those heart-shaped leaves and flowers in summer that made the air smell sweet in a way that was almost more feeling than smell. And they were full of birds that morning, and the sound of them was layered and rich and wonderful. I stood at our gate and listened for a while before I went anywhere. The morning smelled of summer, that particular morning smell, dew still on the grass, coolness that hadn't burned off yet, the smell of growing things that has something green and almost electrical about it. The flowers in the garden border were open. Our neighbors had roses, and they were in full early summer flush, the big blousy ones that were almost indecent in their abundance, deep pink and deep red, and their smell came over the fence in warm waves. I walked down to Oliver's. I expected him to still be asleep. It was genuinely early, but he was already at the gate, not sitting on it this time, standing beside it, hands in his pockets, looking up the street. "I thought you'd be asleep," I said. "Couldn't," he said. "Me neither." We looked at each other. The morning was all around us, early and bright and full of potential. "The creek?" he said. "The creek," I said. And that was how the first day started. The creek was about 20 minutes' walk from our street, through the neighborhood and past the school, which we passed with a specific and highly satisfying feeling of walking past something that currently had no power over you, and then along the path that went behind the playing fields and down through a strip of scrubby woodland that the creek ran through. The creek was not spectacular. I want to be honest about that. It was not the sort of creek you'd paint or photograph. It was about 2 meters wide at its widest, fairly shallow, running over stones and silt between banks that were alternately muddy and grassy, with alders and willows growing along them and their roots dangling into the water. It had a smell, a creek smell, earthy and wet and slightly vegetative, not unpleasant, just distinctive. It had a sound, water over stones, a constant low muttering, Ours with occasional small, louder moments where it fell over a larger rock or squeezed through a narrow gap. But it was ours, Oliver's and mine and the other children's of our neighborhood. It had been ours since we were young enough to barely be trusted at its banks. We knew every inch of it, which parts ran deep, which parts you could wade across with your shoes off and only get wet to the knee, where the good stones were for skimming, where the crayfish hid under the largest rocks. We arrived at the creek on that first morning of the summer, with no particular plan, which, I was learning, was the best way to arrive at something. We sat on the bank for a while, just looking at the water. The early light was coming through the willows in long shafts, catching the surface of the water and making it briefly silver where it moved. A dragonfly appeared, hovered over a calm patch near the bank, then was gone. "We need a raft," Oliver said. "We've been saying that for years," I said. "Now we have time." He was right. That was the thing about this summer, all the things we'd been meaning to do, putting off, saying next time, saying when there's time. Now there was time. Time was what we had. Time in quantities I'd never experienced before, days and days of it, stretching out ahead, unstructured and open. We started the raft that morning. I'll tell you about the raft properly later, because it deserves its own story, the whole history of that raft. But for now, I'll tell you we started it that morning, pulling dead wood from under the willows, arguing about dimensions and construction in the thoughtful way that Oliver always argued about things, which was never angry, just thorough. He wanted to understand the problem from every angle. Sometimes that was excellent and produced solutions I'd never have thought of. Sometimes it meant the arguing took longer than the doing. We worked on the raft all morning. The sun moved up and the dew burned off, and the day warmed by degrees, that early summer warming that comes over you slowly and pleasantly, like you're being heated from the outside in. My sleeves were rolled up, and my arms were getting sun on them, and there was mud on both my knees, and my hands were full of splinters, and I was entirely and completely happy. At noon, we knew it was noon by the sun, roughly, the way you calibrate these things when you're outside all morning. We went back to Oliver's house for lunch. Well, his mother was in the kitchen, and the kitchen smelled of something warm and good. She was a person who kept a great deal of food in the house, and produced meals with great casualness and generosity. The kind of cook who adds a place at the table without comment when extra children appear. She fed us sandwiches and told us not to drip creek mud on the floor and went back to whatever she'd been doing, and we sat at the kitchen table and ate. After lunch, we went back. The afternoon was hotter than the morning, properly hot by mid-afternoon, the real heat of a proper summer day. We waded in the creek, which was glorious, the cool water up to our knees, the stones of the bottom smooth and slippery under our feet. We found 3 crayfish, not by trying, just by lifting a large stone to see what was under it. We watched them for a moment, those prehistoric-looking things with their sideways walk and their raised claws, standing in the churned-up silt of the disturbed bottom, and then let them be and put the stone back. We lay on the bank in the late afternoon and let the sun dry us. The grass was warm beneath our backs. The sky above was that perfect deep blue of a hot June day, with one very large, very white cloud moving slowly from west to east, taking its time. We watched it change shape as it moved. It went through several distinct phases. going from something that looked like a boat to something that looked like a dog to something that simply looked like a cloud. Oliver had found a stick somewhere and was using it to draw diagrams in the soft mud at the water's edge. Plans for the raft. He was very serious about the raft. He was always very serious about structural things. He would make an engineer one day, everyone said, and eventually he did. I watched the cloud and felt the warmth of the sun and listened to the creek and the birds and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere in the neighborhood, someone cutting their summer grass, and I thought, this is good. This is simply and entirely good. That's the feeling I want to give you. That's what I'm trying to put into words. The feeling of a summer afternoon on a creek bank when you're 9 years old and there's nowhere else to be. It's not exciting. It's not dramatic. It's not any of the things that stories are supposed to be. It's just good. Solidly, warmly, completely good, in the way that simple things are good when you're fully in them. My grandmother used to call it just being. She had a way of talking about contentment that never sounded like a lesson. She'd say, sometimes you've just got to be where you are and not be anywhere else in your head. And that's the whole of it. I didn't fully understand that until I was much older. But on that afternoon by the creek, I was doing it without knowing I was doing it. I was just there, just fully and completely there. The sun began to go down, the way it does in summer, slowly, reluctantly, taking its time about it. The light changed from bright afternoon to long golden evening. The shadows grew. The air cooled by a small amount, just a small amount, just enough to feel different on your arms. We sat up from where we'd been lying on the bank and looked at each other. Tomorrow? Oliver said. Tomorrow, I said. Or we walked home through the warm evening. The linden trees at the end of the street were lit up by the setting sun, the flowers on them just beginning to open, and that sweetness was in the air, just beginning. A couple of people were out in their gardens. Mr. Bennett from 3 doors down was watering his vegetables with a hose, moving it back and forth in a slow arc, and the water caught the light and made small rainbows in the air where the fine spray spread. I went inside. My mother was making dinner. My father was in from work, sitting in his chair in the front room with the newspaper. I sat on the bottom stair for a moment and unlaced my muddy shoes and looked at the mud and thought, first day. The first day of the summer with no school. It had been a good first day. Now, let me tell you about the other children. Because it wasn't just Oliver and me, though the two of us were the center of things most of the time, the axis around which the summer turned. There were others, and they matter, and I want to tell you about them properly, the way you'd describe a good painting. Slowly, with attention to each part. There was Margot. Margot was a girl who lived on the street behind ours. You could reach her house through the gap in the hedge at the back of Oliver's garden, a gap that had been there as long as any of us could remember and was probably not officially sanctioned by anyone, but which had been used so consistently and for so long that it had a sort of de facto legitimacy. You went through the gap, and you were in the lane behind the houses, and Margot's gate was 3 long from there. Margot was 10, a year older than Oliver and me, and she wore that year with a certain authority, not in a bossy way, or she was never bossy exactly, but in the way of someone who has slightly more information about the world and feels the responsibility of that. She had her hair in 2 braids, and she always seemed to have something in her hands. A book, a piece of string she was knotting into something, a stone she was examining. She noticed things, small things, the kind that other people walked right past. She'd stop on a path and say very quietly, "Look," and she'd be pointing at something on the ground or on a leaf or in the bark of a tree, and you'd look, and it would be extraordinary. A beetle with a shell like a jewel, a spider's web made visible by morning dew, the way a particular lichen grew in rings, one inside another, over years and years and years. Margot had an older brother and a younger sister, but neither of them were part of our summer in any significant way. Her older brother was 15 and had entirely other concerns, those teenage concerns that made him seem not quite present even when he was in the room, like he was already halfway somewhere else. Her younger sister was 5, and 5 is a different world from 9 and 10. A perfectly fine world, but a different one. It was Margot who first said what I think all of us were feeling, somewhere in the second week of the summer. We were all sitting in Oliver's garden. Oliver, Margot, me, and a boy named Theo, who I'll tell you about in a moment. Sitting in the garden in the warm morning under the apple tree, and Margot looked up from the book she was reading and said, to no one in particular, "It's like time has gone different." We all looked at her. "What do you mean?" Oliver said. "It's like the days are bigger," she said. She thought about it for a moment, frowning slightly in that way she had. "When there's school, a day goes from when you wake up to when you get home, and then it's small, what's left of it. But now a day goes from when you wake up to when it gets dark, the whole day." We were quiet for a moment. Oliver looked at the tree. Theo picked at a blade of grass. "Yes," I said, because she was right. That was exactly it. That was the thing I'd been feeling but hadn't had the words for. The days were bigger. The days were as big as days are supposed to be. Theo, let me tell you about Theo now, because he was a part of things too, though differently. Theo was 8, a full year younger than me, which at that age feels like more than it sounds. He was from a family that had moved to our street about a year before. They'd come from a city, and sometimes you could still feel the city about him. He had a quickness to him, a slight wariness, the manner of a person accustomed to more and faster. He had adapted to our quieter street well enough, but he still had moments where you could see he was translating our rhythms and references into something he understood. Theo was small like me, but in a different way, compact and solid where I was skinny and all corners. He was good at things with his hands, very good. Give him something to build or fix or make, and he went about it with a concentration that was almost alarming to watch. This slight 8-year-old absorbed entirely in whatever he was doing, oblivious to everything else. He and Oliver got on well in the way that two people who each have their own very particular way of thinking sometimes find each other interesting rather than frustrating. So that was our summer company mostly, Oliver and Margot and Theo and me. 4 children with the whole summer in front of them and no school to report to. And I want to tell you about the days, the actual days of it. Not just the feeling, though the feeling is important and I'll keep coming back to it, but the actual texture of those days, the things we did and found and made and lost and tried and failed and tried again. The raft took most of the first 2 weeks. I want to tell you about the raft properly. Oliver had been serious about it from the very start. From that first morning when we'd sat on the creek bank and he'd said we need a raft. By the end of the first day, he had diagrams, actual diagrams, drawn in his small, precise way on sheets of paper from his notebook, overhead view, side view, notes on what kind of wood, notes on how the pieces would be joined. We collected wood. That was the first task, and it took several days in itself. We went along the creek bank and in the scrubby woodland on either side and collected every piece of fallen, dry wood that was large enough to be useful. Some of it was green and soft and no good. Some of it was too rotten, but there was enough of the right kind if you went far enough along if you looked carefully. Margot helped with the collecting. She had a good eye for wood, better than any of us, and could tell at a glance what would hold weight and what wouldn't, what was just sound enough and what was too far gone. She'd grown up with her mother's garden, and she understood growing things, and she understood, therefore, the dying of them, too, the stages of it, the way wood goes from living to dry to soft to returning to the earth over years. Theo helped with the lashing. We had rope. Oliver had found a considerable length of old rope in the shed at the back of his house, the kind of shed that has been accumulating things for generations and contains entire archaeological layers of useful objects. The rope was old but sound, and Theo, who seemed to know about knots with the confidence of someone who'd been taught, lashed the pieces together in ways that held. I dug things out. That was my primary contribution. At the early excavation of the better pieces of wood from where they'd settled into the bank or buried themselves under leaf fall. I was good at that. I was a good digger, small, nimble, not bothered by getting properly muddy. By the end of the first week, we had a pile of suitable wood. By the middle of the second week, we had something that was beginning to look like a raft. By the end of the second week, we had a raft. It was roughly 2 meters by 1 meter. It was flat. It was lashed together with Theo's knots. It was, in the opinion of all 4 of us, beautiful. It was also, we all privately suspected, not entirely sound. There were places where the logs weren't quite as tight against each other as the diagram had suggested they'd be, and the whole thing had a slightly organic wobble to it when you pushed down on one end. "It'll be fine," Oliver said, in the tone of someone who was not entirely sure it would be fine, but had committed to the project. "It floats," Theo said. He'd tested a piece of the wood by itself in the creek. "Wood floats. Wood floats," I agreed. Margot looked at the raft with her thoughtful expression. "We should test it with no one on it first," she said. "Let it go in and see how it sits." This was very sensible advice. We took the sensible advice. We carried the raft to the creek. This required all 4 of us and was heavier than we'd anticipated. And on the count of 3, we slid it in. It floated. Not beautifully. It sat somewhat lower in the water than the diagram had suggested it would. It listed slightly to the right. But it floated. It moved with the current, which was slow at this part of the creek, and it turned as it moved, a slow rotation, and it floated downstream a little way before getting caught on some reeds on the far bank. We looked at each other. Oliver was smiling. He tried not to because he'd been so serious about the whole thing, but the smile came out anyway, unavoidably. "It floats," he said. "It floats," Theo said, and he was already wading in to push it off the reeds. We sailed the raft that afternoon, not all 4 of us at once. The raft emphatically did not support all 4 of us at once, as we discovered very quickly and very wetly. but one at a time. With the others walking along the bank, we poled and paddled along the creek. The feeling of being on the raft was remarkable, not fast. The creek didn't move fast, and the raft was more pushed than sailed. Not dry. You were constantly getting water on your feet, and the thing had a tendency to tip at unexpected moments. But to be on a thing that you had made with your own hands, on the water that you'd been coming to all your lives, moving through the green shade of the willows with the sky reflected in patches around your feet, that was something. That was genuinely something. I lay down on the raft at one point, just lay flat on it, face up, while Oliver and Theo pushed from behind with sticks. I lay flat and looked at the sky through the leaves of the willows, those long, narrow, pale green willow leaves, moving slightly in the breeze. The water moved under me. I could feel it through the logs of the raft, a slight, irregular motion, the feeling of something alive underneath you, the sound of the water around the raft's edges, the sound of the birds. And I thought, I made this thing, we made this thing, and now we are on the water on it. And the sky is up there, and the water is down here, and I am in between, moving slowly through the summer. I was 9 years old. It was one of the best moments of my life. I'm telling you that directly, without any shame about it. One of the best moments of a long life. A life that has had many moments worth mentioning. And it was an afternoon on a homemade raft on a small creek in a summer with no school, and I was 9 years old. The scale of a thing doesn't determine its value. The simplicity of something doesn't mean it can't be one of the best. The afternoon went long. The shadows crossed the water and lengthened. The light changed. We came back to the starting point and hauled the raft up onto the bank and lashed it to a root so it would still be there tomorrow. We were soaking wet and covered in various kinds of creek matter and happier than I can adequately describe. We walked home through the warm evening, steaming slightly in the way that wet children steam in summer warmth, and we didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The afternoon had been its own complete thing, and talking about it would have been like drawing a frame around a painting that didn't need one. I went in, and my mother looked at me and said, "Bath? Before dinner?" I went up and ran the bath and sat in it a long time, feeling the warmth work through muscles that had been pushing and poling and hauling all afternoon, and I looked at my hands. Creek mud under the fingernails, a splinter on one thumb, a small graze from something on the back of one hand. And I thought about the raft. I thought that took 2 weeks. We had more weeks to go. What would they bring? And that is where I'll pause for a moment, loves. Right there, in that warm bath at the end of the raft day, looking at my own muddy hands and thinking about the weeks ahead. Let that rest there. Let that image sit. A 9-year-old boy in a warm bath, thinking about the weeks of summer ahead of him, the weeks with no school and no structure and nothing but the long golden days. You breathe. I'll breathe. The clock ticks. The summer goes on. Close your eyes if they want to close. I'm not going anywhere. The story has a long way still to go, and all of it is good, and none of it is in any hurry. The linden trees at the end of our street were in full flower by the end of June. Their scent came into the house on warm evenings. Through the window, I left open a crack. Sweet and complicated, the way certain things are complicated. Not simple sweetness, but a sweetness that has depth to it, that changes slightly as it moves through the air. I fell asleep to that smell on those summer nights. And even now, even all these years later, if I catch a linden tree in flower somewhere, I am 9 years old again for just a moment. I am in that room, in that summer, the whole long year of no school stretching out ahead. Time is a strange thing. Distance in time is not like distance in space. You can't see that far, and yet you can feel it. You can feel it right now, if you let yourself. You can feel the distance between now and some warm moment in your own past. A summer, a kitchen, a particular smell, a particular quality of light. It's all still there. The past doesn't go away. It just waits patiently in the back rooms of you, and sometimes, in the right kind of quiet, it comes forward. That's what this is tonight. The right kind of quiet. And the summer coming forward. Let me keep going. Let me take you further in, the third week of the summer, and I want you to feel that by now we had settled in. The novelty of no school had worn off in the best possible way, worn smooth like a stone in a river, and what was left was just the thing itself. The actual texture of the days, without the excitement of the first week and without yet any end in sight. Just the summer being itself. Mornings had a pattern by then. I'd wake early, in the light that came through my curtains. They were thin curtains, a pale yellow, and the early summer light came through them and filled the room with a warm golden color that was the color of good mornings. I'd lie for a few minutes, just feeling that. Then I'd get up and go downstairs and have my toast and tea and go out. Some mornings I went to Oliver's first. Some mornings Margot appeared at the hedge gap before I even reached Oliver's gate. Some mornings all four of us converged on the creek or the fields or wherever we were going with no planning at all, as if drawn by the same current. We'd got beyond the raft by then. Or rather, the raft was part of the landscape now, a permanent fixture hauled up on the bank when not in use and fairly regularly in use. We'd got beyond it to other things. The summer was full of other things. We found the old orchard. This needs explaining. At the far end of the fields behind the playing fields, further than the creek, further than we usually went, there was a fence. An old one, sagging wooden posts and rusted wire that had clearly been there for many decades. And beyond the fence, half overgrown, half reclaimed by the encroaching brambles and grasses, was an orchard. Not maintained, not tended. You could see that from the trees themselves, which were old and unpruned, growing in every direction, with the enthusiastic wild sprawl of trees left entirely to themselves. There were apple trees mostly, big old apple trees with trunks that had gone gnarled and gray, and branches that crossed each other and dipped and rose in complex weaving patterns. There were a few pear trees, ours, which Margot identified immediately. There was one very large tree that none of us could identify, something with smoother bark and a broader shape, and which had no fruit visible that we could see. We had found the orchard in the third week because Margot had wanted to go further along the fence line to look for something she'd heard lived out there. A hedgehog, apparently. She'd heard it in the hedge one evening and had wanted to find its run. We followed the fence and found the orchard instead. "It's abandoned," Oliver said. He said it the way he said most things, as an observation, a statement of what is, not a judgment. "It's been here a long time," Margot said. She touched the bark of the nearest apple tree. The bark was thick and furrowed and covered in a pale grayish-green lichen that had grown in intricate patterns over the years. "This tree is very old." "Whose is it?" Theo asked. Nobody knew. We found the way in. There was a section of fence that had given way entirely. The post rotted to nothing, the wire curled back on itself and half buried. We went through. Inside the orchard the air was different, not dramatically. It wasn't mysterious or fairy tale different, but it had a quality of enclosure, of the outside world being slightly further away. The old trees were large enough that their canopies, even untended, overlapped in places, creating shade. The grass between them was long, knee-high on me, higher on Oliver, who was taller. But it was soft grass, not rough, and it moved in the breeze in a pleasing way, in waves. The apples weren't ripe yet. It was too early in the summer. The small green apples were set on the branches among the leaves, firm and tight, and very sour if you tried one, which we did, because trying unripe fruit is obligatory. We each took one bite of an unripe apple and made the specific face that unripe apples demand, and spat out what we'd bitten and laughed. But the orchard was extraordinary in its way. We wandered through it for an hour, that first visit, examining things. Margot found a spider web stretched between two branches of a pear tree, large and complex, a full orb web still slightly caught with the morning's dew, though the dew had mostly gone by then. She showed us each individual anchor thread, how they connected to the branches, how the spiral worked from the center out. Oliver found something in the hollow of one of the oldest apple trees. He reached in very cautiously. He was sensible about hollow trees, you never know, and felt around and brought out what appeared to be the very old and very desiccated remnant of a bird's nest, small, tightly woven, the grasses and hairs and moss that had made it now dry and faded to a uniform gray. He turned it over in his hands carefully, a relic, something that had held eggs once, had held small blind creatures that became birds and flew away. He put it back exactly where he'd found it. Theo climbed. Theo was a good climber, better than any of us, and the apple trees with their low branches and their thick, gnarled structure were made for it. He went up the largest one with a confident efficiency that I envied, and from up in the canopy, looking out over the top of the orchard fence, he described what he saw. "Fields," he said, "far fields, and then a lane, and beyond that, hills." We looked up at him, the three of us on the ground, shading our eyes against the sky. "Can you see our street?" I asked. A pause while he looked. "No. Too many trees." He came down, and we sat under the big old apple tree and ate the sandwiches that Oliver and I had brought. We'd started packing sandwiches when we went out, because coming home at noon interrupted the day. And the shade of the tree was cool, and the grass was soft, and the bees were doing their important work in the long grass around us, and the orchard was entirely quiet, except for the bees and a wood pigeon somewhere in the pear trees, doing that low, rolling coo it does, deeply comfortable with itself. "We should come here every day," Theo said. "Yes," Margot said, and we did. We went to the orchard nearly every day for the rest of that summer. It became one of the centers of the summer, one of the fixed points around which everything else arranged itself. The creek and the orchard, the two poles, the two places that were most ours. I want to tell you about afternoon in the orchard, because it was its own particular thing, and I want to get it right. The orchard in the afternoon heat was different from the orchard in the morning. In the morning it was fresh and cool, and the light was white and clear. But in the afternoon, with the sun high and the heat building, the orchard became drowsy, sleepy even. That's the right word. The bees slowed down. The wood pigeon went quiet, or went off somewhere. The grass was warm to sit on. The shade of the trees was deep and real and cool. We'd lie on our backs in the long grass under the trees, all four of us, sometimes in a row, sometimes just Oliver and me while Margot and Theo were somewhere else, lying on our backs and looking up at the leaves. The leaves in the afternoon sun had that translucency that leaves get when the light is right. The light coming through them so that they glow, each one separately, different shades of green depending on how thick they were and how they were angled. Some almost yellow, some a deep, solid green. The whole canopy above you a kind of living stained glass window that moved slightly in whatever breeze there was. And the smell. I want to tell you about the smell. So the orchard in the afternoon smelled of warm grass and old wood and the faint sweetness of the growing apples. That pre-ripe apple smell, green and just slightly tart. And something else. Something that I have no exact name for, but which I think of as the smell of an old place. Old trees and old earth and the accumulated years of a place that has been left alone. It's a full smell, a complex one, the kind that takes up the whole breath. I'd lie there in the afternoon and I'd let myself go very still. Not sleep, not usually, but still. The way that children can go still when there's no pressure to be active, when the body just settles into the earth and the earth settles back. And I'd listen. The bees. That's what I'd hear mostly in the sleepy afternoon orchard. The bees. Not many at any given moment. You'd hear one, and then another, and sometimes a third, overlapping. The specific sound of a bee is something I find deeply calming, still, today. That warm, fluctuating hum, never aggressive. Bees going about their work are not aggressive sounds. They are busy sounds, occupied sounds, the sound of something completely committed to what it's doing. I'd lie in the grass and listen to the bees and feel the warmth and look at the leaves, and I'd feel as though I was part of it, as though I was a component of the afternoon, like the bees and the grass and the old trees, just another warm thing lying in the sun. My grandmother had kept bees. I'd thought about that sometimes in the orchard. She'd had 3 hives at the bottom of her garden, and she'd tended them every year, and the honey she got from them was unlike any honey I've had before or since. Dark and complex, and with a flavor that shifted as you held it in your mouth, the way certain wines do, going through several things before it settled. I thought about her bees in the orchard. I thought about how bees have been doing this, finding flowers, gathering what they need, making what they make, for so much longer than any of us, longer than the orchard, longer than our village, longer than the human habit of naming things. That kind of thought, the deep time thought, I call it, the thought that reaches back past the immediate and the personal into the very old. That kind of thought visited me in the orchard sometimes. I wasn't old enough to do anything with it, not yet. I didn't have the vocabulary or the framework, but the feeling came. The feeling of standing at the edge of something very large and very old and very quietly ongoing. I carry that feeling still. I carry it especially at certain times, in the presence of old trees, in places that have been left alone for a long time, in mornings that are very still and very clear, the feeling of the deep time underneath things, the feeling that the world was here before us and will be here after us, and is in the meanwhile being very patient with our brief, noisy, important feeling lives. The summer taught me that. in its slow and roundabout way, the summer with no school. Let me tell you about rain, because it wasn't all sun and orchard afternoons. That would be dishonest. It was England, or a place very much like it, a place of the same temperament. And it rained. Of course it rained. The summer had rain in it. And I want to tell you about the rain, because rain in that summer had a quality that rain on a school day never had. The first proper rainy day came in early July. I woke up and heard it before I opened my eyes. That particular sound of summer rain on a bedroom window, which is softer than winter rain, less percussive, more whispering. I lay with my eyes closed and listened to it for a while. The sky beyond my curtains, when I eventually looked, was the soft white gray of a day that's committed to clouds. I didn't feel disappointed. That's the thing I want to tell you. I expected to feel disappointed. A rainy day in summer when you had plans, when you wanted to be outside, and I didn't. The rain felt like a change in the program, a different kind of day rather than a lesser kind of day, something that had its own possibilities. I went downstairs. My mother was in the kitchen, and she looked at me with that expression of mild concern that mothers have for children whose plans are being rained on. "Rainy day," she said. "Yes. Perhaps Oliver could come here. You could do things inside." I had, it turned out, no strong feeling about inside versus outside. The summer had made me flexible about that. I pulled on a raincoat, my old yellow one that I'd had since I was 6, and which was getting tight in the shoulders, and went to Oliver's. Oliver was sitting in his hallway reading when I got there. A large book, which was not unusual for Oliver. He looked up when I knocked and came to the door. "Rainy day," I said. "Yes." He held up the book. "I've been reading about boats." This was, of course, connected to the raft. Now, Oliver was always reading about things connected to projects. He did things properly. We spent the morning in his house, in the room he used as a sort of study, a small room at the back, with a window that looked into the garden and his mother's ambitious planting. We sat at his desk and looked at the boat book. I didn't read it exactly, but Oliver talked me through the parts he found interesting, which was a very Oliver way of doing things. He absorbed information and then processed it aloud, and you understood things by listening to him understand them. The rain came down outside the window in a pleasant way, steady, not heavy. The garden received it gratefully. You could see that, the way the plants held themselves differently in rain, opening slightly toward it rather than the sun. The roses by the fence were bowed a little under the weight of the drops, the petals darker in the wet. A blackbird sat on the fence post, very upright, apparently indifferent to being thoroughly wet. Margot came through the hedge gap around 11 o'clock with her coat on and water on her braids. She came in through the back door. We all used the back door at Oliver's, and stood in the kitchen and pulled off her coat and said, "I've been thinking about maps." Maps. This was a new direction. "What about maps?" Oliver said. "We should make one," Margot said, "of our places, the creek and the orchard and the roots, a proper map." We were very still for a moment, the three of us, as this idea settled. "Yes," Oliver said, and the way he said it, with that particular quality of certainty he had, I meant, this is a good idea and we are doing it. We spent the rain day making a map. It was one of the best rainy days I can remember. We spread paper on the dining room table. Oliver's mother offered sheets of lining paper, the long rolls that are meant for the backs of shelves, which gave us a very large surface. And we began. We argued about where to start. Naturally, we argued about where to start. Four children mapping their known world will always have different opinions about what the center of that world is. Margot thought the orchard should be the center because it was the farthest point and everything else organized around getting there. Theo thought it should be Oliver's house because that was where we most often started. Oliver thought it should be the creek, because the creek was the longest feature and the best reference line. I thought privately that it should be the gap in the hedge because that was the point of passage, the threshold between our regular world and the extended one. We compromised the way groups of children compromise, which is to say that Oliver drew the creek in first, and everyone accepted this as the organizing line and worked from there. The map took all day. By evening, it covered the entire sheet of lining paper and had compass points estimated and distances also estimated based on our walking times, which Margot had been quietly clocking for weeks. It had the creek with its bends carefully noted, and the willows marked, and the location of the raft indicated with a small drawing. It had the route through the fields, and the fence, and the gap in the fence, and the orchard itself, with each tree that we knew well marked individually, the big apple tree, the climbing tree, the pear trees. It had our streets, with our houses marked. It had the school marked without comment. Margot drew mostly. She drew beautifully and precisely with a natural mapping instinct. She'd scale things and they'd look right. She'd note the curve of the path and it would be the actual curve. The rest of us contributed, Oliver with measurements and calculations and the compass point annotations. Theo with the distant landmarks he'd spotted from the apple tree. Me with, I'm not sure exactly what I contributed, if I'm honest. I think I contributed enthusiasm and, periodically, snacks. When it was done, we all stood around it and looked at it for a long time. It was our world, our specific, personal, summer world, mapped and documented and made real in a way that felt like a discovery. Not of anything new, but of the fact that it was there, that it was ours, that it had a shape. I think about that map sometimes. We put it on the wall of Oliver's study, and it stayed there for the rest of the summer. We added to it as the summer went on. New things found, new routes. The stream that fed into the creek from the north that we found in August. The old stone wall at the back of the far field that had no apparent purpose but was interesting anyway. We added them. The map grew. I don't know what became of it. Oliver's family moved some years later. The map probably didn't survive, but it lives very clearly in my memory. The large sheet of lining paper, covered in careful lines and smaller, careful drawings and notes in various handwritings, all hung on the wall of a small room on a rainy summer day. Our world made visible. The rain let up by evening. It didn't stop completely, but it thinned, and the clouds broke in the west, and there was a stretch of late evening sun that lit everything up that particular way that wet things are lit by sun, with that heightened vividness, that quality of each color being slightly more itself than usual. The wet grass was very green. The wet roses were very red. The sky, where it was blue between the breaking clouds, was a blue that had depth to it, a blue with dimension. We all went outside after the rain, out into the garden and then into the lane. The lane smelled of wet earth and wet stone and something fresh and opened up. I've always loved the smell after rain, the way the rain brings out things from the earth. from the dust, or from the pavement. Things that were there all along, waiting. The rain doesn't create the smell, it releases it. We walked down to the creek and looked at it. It had risen a little with the rain. Not much, but you could see the difference. The water running slightly faster, slightly higher on the banks, the color a little more brown from the stirred silt. The raft was fine, still lashed to its root, rocking slightly more than usual with the increased current. We didn't try to raft in it that evening. We just stood and looked. 4 children in wet shoes at the edge of a slightly swollen creek in the evening light after rain. Margot said, "That was a good rainy day." Nobody disagreed. Let me take a breath here. Let me let you breathe. The evening is settling in around us, and the story is settling too, finding its proper level. We're well into the summer now, into the real heart of it. Those warm weeks of July that were the best weeks of the best summer of my childhood. I could go on all night. I want to go on all night. There's so much more I want to tell you about the evening we caught fireflies, about the late afternoon storm that bent the linden trees and then left behind a sky so clear and clean you could see further than usual in every direction, about the day Theo found something in the creek that none of us could identify, and which we spent 3 days trying to look up in Oliver's father's encyclopedias, about the apples ripening, about the first ripe apple of that summer, about what it tasted like. But we'll take it slowly. We'll take it the way the summer took itself, at its own pace, unhurried, one day at a time. You rest. Let the story flow around you like water, like the creek in its banks. Let your breathing slow. Let your hands go soft. There's nothing required. The linden trees are in my memory. The sweet, complicated smell of them. The sound of the creek at night, which I could hear sometimes from my open window if I listened hard enough. The map on Oliver's wall. The raft on the bank. The old apple tree in the overgrown orchard. The summer going on. Still with me? Good. You've been good company tonight. Do you know that? Good, quiet company. The best kind. Let me go on. Let me go deeper into the summer. We were in July, the good part, the beating heart of the summer, and I want to tell you about the heat. Because July was hot. Genuinely, memorably hot. The kind of heat that settles in for days at a time and transforms things. Transforms the look of the street, the shimmer on the road surface in the afternoon, the way distant things wobble slightly in the heat haze. Transforms the smell of things, the dry grass smell, the sun-warmed stone smell, the smell of tarmac when it's been in the sun all day, which is not unpleasant exactly, but is very specific. Transforms the pace of things when it's hot enough. Things slow down. People slow down. Even the birds went quieter in the real heat of the afternoon. Even the bees seemed to move differently, less urgent. I loved that slowness. I found that summer that I loved the heat. Loved it in the way you love something that encompasses you completely. You step into it, and it's everywhere. There's no avoiding it. And you can either resist it and be miserable, or give in to it and discover that giving in is a form of freedom. I gave in to it. We adapted. Children adapt quickly to whatever condition is given, which is one of the things I have always loved about children. No prolonged complaints, no extended negotiations with reality, just this is what it is. What do we do with it? We moved our day around the heat. Morning was for doing. The creek, the orchard, anything active, anything that required energy. By noon, the heat was already building and we'd slow down, and by mid-afternoon in the hottest part of July, the heat was so thorough that we'd end up somewhere shaded, lying on our backs or sitting against something and doing very little. And that very little was its own thing, its own important thing. I want to tell you about the doing nothing hours of that summer because they were not wasted. I want to say that plainly. The hours we did nothing, or close to nothing, were not wasted. They were where a great deal happened, not on the surface, not in the visible, active, product-producing way, but underneath, in the slow, quiet way that things grow underground before they're visible. I'll tell you what we did in those hours. Oliver read. He was always reading. But in the heat of the afternoon, he read with a particular absorption, propped against the apple tree in the orchard or lying in the shade along the creek bank, his book held slightly above his face, entirely elsewhere, entirely inside whatever the book was. He read things I didn't read, long things, complicated things, things about how the world worked, physics, history, the encyclopedias, which he was genuinely working through, not all at once, but steadily, a volume at a time. He had the kind of mind that wanted to know everything, and he was teaching it to be patient about the process. Margot made things. In the slow afternoon hours, Margot was never idle in the way that looked like idleness. She always had something in her hands, the string knotting I mentioned before, which turned out to be a kind of weaving, at making small, flat pieces of knotted pattern that had no practical purpose but were beautiful in a small and intricate way. She collected things, too, not messily, not randomly, but with a curatorial eye. Interesting stones, a perfect snail shell, empty and intact, a jay's feather, bright blue and white, found in the grass of the orchard. She kept them in a small tin that she carried in her coat pocket, and she'd bring it out in the quiet afternoon hours and examine her collection, and sometimes add to it, and sometimes rearrange it. Theo slept. Straightforwardly and without apology, Theo could lie down in the afternoon heat and be asleep in what seemed like seconds. He had a gift for it. He'd lie down, close his eyes, and inside a minute his breathing would have changed, and he was gone. I envied that. I've never been able to sleep during the day, not even as a child. My brain won't allow it. It insists on running even when everything else wants to rest. And I looked at things. That's the simplest way to put it. I looked at things. In the slow afternoon heat, when we were stretched out in the shade of the orchard trees or lying by the creek, I looked at whatever was in front of me, and I looked at it for a long time. A cloud moving very slowly, a leaf on the tree above me, the light coming through it, the surface of the water in the creek, where it was slow and flat near the bank, and you could see the sky in it, and the trees reflected, and your own face if you leaned over, and also, below all that, the clear brown bottom with its stones and its waving thread of weed. Looking at something for a long time, and without needing it to mean something, without needing it to produce anything, that is a skill, and it's one that the slow afternoons of that summer began to teach me. It's a skill I've used all my life, and I'm still working on it. My father called it sitting quiet. He did it himself occasionally. You'd find him in the garden in the evening, sitting on the old wooden bench by the back fence, not doing anything, not reading, not thinking about anything obvious, just sitting. I'd learned to recognize that as a state, not an absence. He was there, fully, just looking and being quiet and letting the garden and the evening be what they were. I was learning my version of that in the orchard, In the afternoon, in the heat, let me tell you about the evening of the fireflies. I mentioned it before, and I haven't forgotten. It was a Friday evening in mid-July. We'd been at the orchard all afternoon. I think Theo had been asleep for nearly 2 hours, which was a personal record even for him. And as the heat began to ease in the evening and the light started its long golden descent, we didn't immediately go home. We often stayed out later than we might have on a school evening. That was one of the small luxuries of the summer. The evenings were ours, too. There was no tomorrow morning to prepare for, no homework to have done, no bedtime that was entirely non-negotiable. The evenings spread out like the days. We were still in the orchard as the light changed. The shadows between the trees grew and stretched. The color of things went from the bright lit clarity of afternoon to the warmer, more complex tones of evening. The apple trees took on color. The gray of their bark went warmer, almost amber in the evening light, and the leaves went from green to gold. And then, very quietly, in the corner of my vision first, I thought I'd imagined it. A brief, small, cold light low in the grass at the far end of the orchard. There, and then not there. I sat up. I stared. Nothing. And then another, closer this time. A tiny, cold, greenish light, pulsing once, twice, and then gone. "Oliver?" I said very quietly. He looked up from his book. I pointed. We both watched. A third light appeared near the fence, low in the long grass. On, off, on, off. Fireflies. I'd never seen fireflies before. I'd read about them. I'd seen pictures. But I'd never seen the real thing. I didn't even know we had them. I thought they were a foreign thing, a southern thing, something from picture books and hot countries. But there they were, in the overgrown old orchard in the English summer evening, in the long grass under the old apple trees, blinking their cold, impossible lights. We all saw them now. Theo was awake. That woke him. The catching breath quality of the moment waking him where 2 hours of sun hadn't. Margot was very still, very alert, watching. They multiplied, not dozens, not hundreds. This wasn't a tropical spectacle, but enough. 10, 20, scattered through the grass and the lower branches of the trees, each one blinking in its own time, its own rhythm, the cold greenish light appearing and disappearing and appearing again. None of us said anything for a long time. We just watched. I think it was the unexpectedness of it, the surprise, in the best sense. We'd been coming to this orchard for weeks. We knew it well. We thought we knew what it contained. And then the evening came, and it turned on its lights and was different, was more, was something we hadn't known about and couldn't have anticipated. Margot eventually reached out her hand very slowly toward the nearest one, not to catch it, just to offer a surface. It landed on her finger. Tiny, much smaller than you'd think, given the light it made. A small brown beetle, unremarkable in itself, blinking its improbable light on her finger. She held it for a moment. We all looked. Then it flew off, a small loop in the air, and was alight again and was gone into the grass. We stayed until the light was fully gone and we couldn't see each other's faces clearly. Stayed and watched the fireflies and didn't talk, or barely talked. What was there to say? The fireflies said everything that needed saying. I went home in the dark, the warm, soft, firefly dark, and I went to bed without being asked to, which surprised my mother, and I lay in my bed and thought about the lights in the grass and the light through the apple tree leaves and Margot's face when the firefly sat on her finger. Some moments are complete in themselves. They don't need to be part of anything larger. They don't need a purpose or lesson or before and after. They just are. They're complete, like a stone that is exactly the right shape and weight in your hand, like a note of music that resolves just right. The fireflies were one of those moments, and I've kept it safe for all the years since, in the back room of myself where the complete things are kept. Let me tell you about the later part of July, about the week or so before August. By late July, we had a rhythm that was as regular as school had been, but entirely self-made. We had our places and our routes and our times. We had the map on Oliver's wall, which now had several additions, including a small drawing of the orchard at night with tiny dots for the fireflies, which Margot had added the morning after, carefully and without comment. We knew the creek in all its moods by now. We knew how it looked in morning light and afternoon light and evening light. We knew how it rose after rain and dropped after a long, dry stretch. We knew where the good shade was at different times of day, and where you could still feel the sun at evening, if you wanted to. We knew the birds that used it, the dippers that ran on the stones in the shallower sections, the gray herons that stood motionless in the water sometimes, so still they looked like sculptures, waiting for something with infinite patience. The kingfisher. I haven't mentioned the kingfisher yet. I should have mentioned it earlier, but some things you save because they deserve their moment. We saw the kingfisher for the first time in the third week of July. It was morning, early, just Oliver and me, the others not yet arrived. We were sitting on the bank in that particular morning quiet that had become one of my favorite things, that freshwater bird and light morning quiet. And something went past along the water surface at a speed that didn't match the other things there. A flash, blue-orange, low, arrow fast. Both of us turned our heads at the same moment. It was gone before we'd finished turning, just a streak of color and then nothing, the creek the same as it had been. But we both looked at each other with the same expression, the same wide-eyed certainty. Was that, I started. Yes, Oliver said. We didn't move for the next 20 minutes. We sat very still and very quiet on the bank, and we waited. And it came back. It came along the creek from the upstream direction, that same arrow speed, that same improbable brightness. The blue of its back, so intensely blue, it seemed almost wrong, seemed like it belonged in another climate entirely, and the orange of its breast, and the absolute purposefulness of its flight. It went past so fast we barely had it for more than a second, but we saw it, clear and complete and real. We told the others when they came. Margot was the most excited. She'd been wanting to see a kingfisher for years, she said, had been told they were in the area, but had never seen one. Theo was impressed in the practical way he had of being impressed. How fast does it fly? We went back the next day and the next, and waited. We saw it twice more that week. Each time was the same, the flash, the disbelief, the moment of adjusting to the fact that something that bright and that fast was actually real and actually in the world. I think about the kingfisher sometimes now when I'm sitting quietly somewhere and the mind starts reaching for things that were true. It's a very specific kind of reminder that the world is full of extraordinary things going about their business without caring whether we notice. The kingfisher didn't perform for us. It wasn't there for us. It was going from somewhere to somewhere else, very fast, on its own business entirely. We happened to be sitting still enough to see it. That's the lesson, in a way. Sit still enough, be quiet enough, and the extraordinary things go past. Now, let me tell you about August, about the way the summer changed in August. It happened gradually, the way seasonal changes always do, not all at once, but in a series of small shifts that you don't notice individually but that add up over days to something unmistakably different. The first thing I noticed was the light. The light in August was different from the light in July. Not worse, just different. A little lower, even at midday. A little more golden and a little less pure white. The shadows were longer at the same hour than they'd been a few weeks before. Margot noticed it first, actually. She was always noticing the light. She said one morning, "The light's changed." And we all looked, and she was right. The second thing was the apples. The apples in the orchard, which had been hard, green things when we'd found the orchard in June, which had been underripe and sharp when we'd tried them in July, were starting at the beginning of August, to change. The green was warming. The first of them had a blush of yellow. A few had fallen already, the two early ones lying in the long grass and smelling strongly of apple, a smell that is one of the great smells of the end of summer, rich and sweet and slightly fermented. We tried one, an early one, fallen a few days before. It was ripe, not perfectly ripe, a little mealy, a little too sweet, but ripe. An actual, real, ripe apple from the tree in the overgrown orchard that we'd found and claimed as ours. Margot bit into it first. She was there first. She'd spotted it. She chewed, and her expression went through several things. The initial caution of not sure yet, then the adjustment of, oh, this is something, then the simple pleasure of yes. Try it, she said. We each had a piece, and it was imperfect. It was early. It was mealy at the edges. But it was wonderful, because it was that apple from that tree in that place we'd been coming to all summer, because the summer had been building toward it in some way we hadn't been tracking consciously, but which felt obvious in retrospect. The apples had been growing all summer while we lay under the tree reading and sleeping and looking at the sky. They'd been doing their slow work, and now they were ready, or nearly ready. Something about that apple, the first bite of it, the sweetness of it in the August morning, made me feel something I didn't have words for at 9 years old. I have more words for it now. It was the feeling of time passing, not sadly, not with regret, not yet, but with a clarity. This has been growing, this has been coming. The summer has been moving all along, even when it felt endless, moving toward this apple. I ate my piece and looked up through the branches of the tree and the apples above me, still unripe mostly, still green, still on the branch, and I thought, in a few weeks those will be ready. And a few weeks after that, the tree will be empty, and the leaves will start to go, and the year will turn. The third thing that was different about August was harder to name, but just as real. A quality of the days, a slight change in the feeling of them, as if the summer, which had been going forward and forward through June and July, was now still going forward, still warm and full and good, but also, at the same time, beginning its turn back, like a tide that has been coming in and is now imperceptibly at the very beginning of its going out. I didn't want that. I won't pretend I wasn't aware of it. By August, I knew the summer would end. I'd been half knowing it all summer, the way you half know certain things, keeping them in the periphery where they can be ignored. But in August, it came into the center of my vision. And what I did with it, what children do with the awareness of an ending when they don't yet have all the tools for processing it, was to be more present, to be more fully in each day. Not in a conscious, philosophical way. I wasn't 9 years old and deciding to practice mindfulness. But something in me turned toward the days with a new intensity. I want to go to the creek today, I'd think. And I'd go. And I'd be at the creek more fully than I'd been at the beginning of summer, when there seemed to be time for everything, when no individual day mattered because there were so many. Each day in August mattered. Not sadly, not with heaviness, but they mattered. I felt their value. I think that's something the summer taught me, too. The thing that has an end is not diminished by having an end. It's made more vivid by it. The apple is sweeter because it ripens and falls and is gone. The summer is more itself in August because you can feel the turn in it. Nothing good lasts forever, and the not lasting is part of the good. I'm an old man telling you this. I've had a lifetime to think about it, but I first felt it when I was 9 years old in the orchard in August, biting into a too early fallen apple. Let me tell you what we did in August, what the long, warm days of August held. We went to the creek, but differently now. The water was lower than it had been. The dry summer had drawn it down, and the parts that had been deep enough to wade were shallow, and the stones of the bottom were visible in places they hadn't been before. New parts of the creek floor revealed new arrangements of stones and silt. We found a stretch we'd never been able to examine closely, where the creek bent around a large root, and in that stretch there were things: a freshwater mussel, shell intact and beautiful, a knot of water plants, very green, very rooted, bending in the slow current. And the most extraordinary thing, a small section of clay bank that had been undercut by the water and in which you could see, if you looked at the right angle, layers. Thin, dark layers of organic material in the clay, alternating with lighter bands. Years embedded in the bank. Oliver got very excited about the layers. He drew them in his notebook. He explained, he'd read about it, that each dark layer was a year of organic material, a year's worth of leaves and plant matter settling in the water, that you could count them, roughly. That this small section of bank had a kind of record in it. We counted. Oliver led the counting because Oliver was precise. We counted 15 or 16 distinct dark layers, which meant, he said, with the careful qualification of someone who understood margin of error, even at 9, 15 or 16 years, at minimum, probably more because the lower layers were compressed. 15 years before that moment, I was not yet born. The creek had been laying down its record in the clay year after year, while I didn't exist yet. And before that, further back than our layers could read. We sat with that for a while. Then Theo threw a stone into the water, not disrespectfully, just because he'd been very still for a while and needed to throw something, and we laughed, and the moment of deep time gave way to the present, which was exactly right. We went back to the orchard most afternoons, all through August. The apples were ripening in waves, the earliest trees were done and going, their windfalls gathering in the grass, while the later ripening trees were still at their fullest. We got to know the trees individually by then. The big apple tree that Theo climbed, which produced small, hard apples with a bright, sharp flavor that was almost more tart than sweet. The older, more central tree that produced bigger apples, the ones that went yellow-green first and then a warm gold, that were sweeter and softer and had a perfume about them when you bit in. We ate a lot of apples in August. We had no permission from anyone. Whose apples were they, really? The orchard was abandoned, the owner untraceable, the fence decaying. We'd never been told we couldn't. We ate apples, and we sat in the grass, and we lay under the trees, and the summer went on. Margot had begun pressing leaves. She'd found somewhere a book about it, pressing and preserving leaves and flowers, and she'd been doing it carefully all summer, gathering specimens of the most interesting or beautiful things and pressing them between the pages of old heavy books at home. By August, she had a considerable collection. She brought the book to the orchard one afternoon and showed us. A fern frond from the creek bank, perfectly pressed, every tiny division of it preserved. A rose petal from the garden, still holding its deep pink. Grass with its seed head. A leaf from one of the orchard apple trees, its shape perfect, the veins of it showing clearly in the pressed surface. She turned the pages slowly. The whole summer was in that book. Not all of it. Not the raft, or the kingfisher, or the fireflies, or the map, or the creek's clay layers, but the visible, cling and preservable parts of it. The botanical record of our summer. I thought about that book for a long time after she showed us, about what it meant to keep things, to press a fern between pages and say, this was here, this was real. I held this on this day in this place, and it was the color of a summer fern, and it felt this way in my hands and smelled of creek bank earth. Memory is the same thing, I've come to think, just a different kind of pressing, the experiences of your life pressing themselves between the pages of you, holding their shape over years, so that you can open to any page and find them still there, still with their colors, still with their smell. If you breathe carefully, that is what tonight is, what this whole long, gentle night of remembering is, a slow turning of the pages, finding each thing still pressed there, still bright, still true, the summer of no school, page after page of it. Let me tell you about the rain in August, because it rained in August too, different from the July rain. August rain has a different quality, heavier sometimes, more serious. You feel the year in it. You feel what is coming. One afternoon in the middle of August, a storm came up that nobody had anticipated. We'd been at the creek, the four of us, when the sky in the west started to do something, started to build. The clouds that came up were large ones, very dark at their undersides, moving faster than clouds usually move in summer. The air changed, became very still, and then became very charged the way air becomes before lightning. A particular tingling quality that you feel on your skin. Oliver looked at the sky. We should go. We went. We went fast, not running, but walking with purpose, which felt more sensible. Margot and Thea were ahead, going toward the gap in the fence. Oliver and I were behind. We were still in the open fields when the storm hit. It was magnificent. I want to say that first, before I tell you about getting wet. It was genuinely magnificent. The lightning came first, a long horizontal stroke across the bottom of the clouds, very bright, the whole sky white for a moment. Then the thunder, not immediately, several seconds, meaning it was still a little way off. Then the rain. The rain was not the rain of June or July. The rain was the full summer storm kind, warm and heavy and loud, the drops large, coming down with real intent. Within about 30 seconds, we were thoroughly soaked. Not damp, not wet and trying to stay dry, soaked. Completely, all four of us. We ran the last bit, splashing through the grass that was already muddy with the quantity of water coming down. We got through the fence and into the lane, and then Oliver's back gate, and then the kitchen. Oliver's mother turned around from the stove and looked at us, and made no comment on the state of us, but pointed immediately at the hooks by the back door and handed us towels from the airing cupboard with the efficiency of someone who has dealt with weather-related children many times before. We stood in the kitchen, dripping, wrapped in towels, and listened to the storm outside. The kitchen windows were running with rain, and the sound of it on the roof was extraordinary. A continuous rush and drum, the sound of enormous quantities of water arriving all at once. Lightning lit the kitchen window briefly, the thunder following closer than before. Oliver's mother gave us hot chocolate. Let me tell you about that hot chocolate. I don't know why she had it. It wasn't the kind of thing that was always in the house in those days, in that kind of household. But she had it that afternoon, and she made it properly, with milk heated on the stove, not just hot water, and she put it in mismatched mugs and gave one to each of us, and we stood in the kitchen wrapped in towels and drank it, warm from the inside, soaked from the outside. The storm magnificent through the window, the kitchen smelling of milk and cocoa and wet children and rain. I have held that moment in me for decades. Every time I have hot chocolate, even now, even as an old man for whom hot chocolate is perhaps an occasional gentle indulgence, I am briefly in that kitchen. I am soaked and wrapped in a towel and 9 years old, and the storm is outside, and everything is wonderful. The storm passed in about an hour. It blew through. Summer storms do that. They arrive dramatic, and they leave. After the storm, the sky was the deepest, clearest blue, and the world was washed entirely clean, and the evening light came in at such an angle and in such a color that it seemed almost too much, almost theatrical. Everything was lit up and fresh and very itself. We went back out, drier, but not dry. We walked down to the creek. Which by then had risen noticeably, was running fast and brown and talking loudly to itself about the experience. The raft was fine. Let me pause here in the story and tell you something about Theo, because I haven't told you quite enough about him, and he deserves more. Theo. I mentioned he was quiet, that he was good with his hands, that he slept easily in the afternoons. But there was more to him. There was something in Theo that was more than competent, something that saw problems as invitations. In late August, the raft had developed a problem. The lashing on one end had worked loose. The rope softened by being wet so often. The wood shifted by weeks of being pushed and pulled and used. It listed now more than it had. It had a tendency to tip if the weight wasn't distributed exactly right. Theo looked at it for a while the morning we discovered the problem. He walked around it. He knelt and looked at the lashing from different angles. He pressed on different parts to feel how it moved. Then he said, "I need some nails." He went home and came back with nails and a hammer, and, somewhat to our surprise, a hand drill. He'd asked his father, apparently, and his father, a practical man himself, who approved of projects and of children learning to do things, had helped him select what he needed. Theo spent the better part of 2 mornings fixing the raft. Not just patching the immediate problem, He went over the whole thing, tightening and reinforcing, and in a few places, replacing. He worked with that particular absorbed intensity that was his, oblivious to everything, completely inside the problem. Oliver helped, all because Oliver always helped with structural things, but mostly it was Theo's project. When he was done, the raft was better than it had ever been, more solid, better balanced. It sat in the water with a stability that the first version hadn't had. He said, looking at it, "Now it'll last." And there was something in his voice when he said it. Something that wasn't just about the raft. I think about Theo sometimes and wonder if he became a builder. He should have been a builder. He had the right kind of patience and the right kind of care and that particular quality of wanting the thing he made to last, to hold, to do what it was meant to do for a long time. The raft lasted the rest of the summer. It lasted past the summer, actually. We went back to it in the autumn, and it was still there, still lashed to the root, slightly more weathered but sound. Theo's repair had held. Let me tell you about the end of August, about the last week of it, which had a particular quality that I've never forgotten. The air was changing. The mornings had a coolness now. Not cold, not yet, but different. A suggestion of what was coming. The dew was heavier. There were spiders everywhere, their webs showing up in the morning damp, stretched between fence posts, across the gap in the hedge, along the creek bank railings. The spiders of late summer making the most of the warmth that remained. The orchard was at its best in the last week of August. The apples were fully ripe on most of the trees, and the fallen ones lay thick in the grass, and the smell of them was very strong, sweet and rich and complex, the smell of apples in quantity, in the sun, in the process of returning to the earth. Not a sad smell, not a decay smell, a transformation smell. We went to the orchard in the last week of August with a bag, and we picked apples. Properly picked, as many as we could carry. We were not stealing, we told each other, because there was no one to steal from. We were stewards. We were harvesting a neglected thing. We were, as Margot put it with her particular precise way of saying things, doing what the apples needed. We brought them back to Oliver's. His mother put them in a bowl on the kitchen counter, and they sat there for days, that bright jumble of russet and gold and green-yellow, smelling of the orchard, smelling of the summer. She used some to make a crumble. Oh, she gave us each the peelings and the cores, and we brought those back to the creek and put them in the water for the fish, because we felt the summer deserved a ceremony of some kind, and that was the ceremony we had. The last proper warm day of that summer, and I knew, when I was in it, that it was the last proper warm day, the way you sometimes know, was the last Friday of August. We were at the orchard, all four of us, the whole long afternoon. The sun was warm but not hot. The real heat was done, but the warmth remained, a gentle, autumn-approaching warmth that felt more tender than July's heat had felt. The light was that particular August gold that is the most beautiful light of the year. The trees were heavy with their last fruit. The grass was long and warm around us. We lay on our backs under the big apple tree, all four of us, or in a row. Theo was not asleep. Unusually that afternoon, Theo was awake, looking up at the same sky the rest of us were looking at. Oliver had put his book down. Margot had her collection tin in her hands, but was not looking at it, was looking up. Nobody said anything for a long time. A long, good, full time. Then Oliver said quietly, "School starts Monday." Pause. "Yes," I said. Another pause. "This was good," Theo said. Not a question, a statement. Simple and complete. "Yes," we all said. Or didn't say out loud, but said in some other way, in the quality of the silence after. We lay there for the rest of the afternoon. The sun went down through the trees, and the shadows lengthened, and the air cooled by degrees. An apple fell somewhere to our right, the soft thump of it in the long grass. A bird, I don't know what kind, called once from the direction of the fence and was answered from farther away. And the summer was full, complete, not ended, not over, but complete, the way a meal is complete when you've eaten it well and slowly and with the right company, and you sit back and you don't need anything else. I felt that. We all felt that, I think, that satisfying completion. We went home as the sky went dark blue, through the fields, through the gap in the fence, along the lane, through the hedge gap, Oliver's gate, my front door. My mother was in the kitchen. "Back," I said. "Good day?" I thought about it, about the right way to answer. "Yes," I said. "Really good." She looked at me with that particular look, the one that knows more than it says. "School on Monday," she said. Yes. I went to bed that night and lay in the dark, and I thought about the whole summer. Let it come through me, the whole long thing. The morning of no school, the creek, the raft, Oliver and Margot and Theo, the orchard and the fireflies and the kingfisher and the clay layers in the creek bank, the rain day and the map, the hot chocolate in the storm, the apples, the days of doing nothing and the days of doing everything, all of it. Right there in the dark of my room on the last August night, the linden trees outside still holding their last warmth, the summer, finally, fully, completely its own thing. And I thought, I'll remember this, not consciously, not deliberately. I don't think I made a decision to remember. I think I just recognized somewhere in the 9-year-old version of myself that was lying in that bed that this was something to hold, something that mattered, something that was going into the back rooms of me where the important things go. And I was right. Here I am, all these years later. Here it is, still perfect, still whole. The summer we had no school. Let me breathe. Let me let the night be quiet for a moment. The summer is in this room now. Can you feel it? That warm golden thing, all those July days and August afternoons, the smell of the creek and the orchard and the warm grass, the sound of the bees in the afternoon. You rest. You let it be around you. There's no rush. The last part of the story is coming, and it has the gentlest ending, and we'll get there slowly. Still here. Good. Good. The fire is lower now. The clock has moved. The night is deep, and the whole world is resting, or nearly resting. I'm still sitting in my chair, and I've been remembering all this time, the summer of no school, all its long, beautiful days. And there's still more. There's always more. When you really settle into a memory, there are layers that you don't reach until you've been looking for a while. Let me tell you about going back to school, about the Monday morning. I woke up, and it was school again. The alarm clock, which hadn't been set all summer, which had been sitting on my bedside table like a retired thing, a thing that had temporarily lost its purpose. The alarm clock went off, and it was early, and outside the window, the sky was the blue-gray of a September morning, which is different from the blue-gray of an August morning, cooler, more resolved. The summer's warmth had been a suggestion, and this was a statement. I lay there for a minute with the alarm ticking beside me. I'd turned off the bell, but the mechanism went on. And I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about the summer. Then I got up and went to school. I want to tell you that it was terrible. I want to tell you there was some great wrenching, some profound sadness, some heartbreak. But it wasn't like that. It was just back. The school building still the same, the cracked playground concrete, the flagpole, the smell of floor polish and chalk dust faintly, even in September. The other children, slightly taller, slightly different seeming, slightly more of themselves. Oliver was at the gate. He was always at the gate. He had his satchel and his straight-ahead look and a small dried apple pip in his pocket. From the orchard. I noticed it later when it fell out. He'd kept it. He'd kept a seed. "All right?" he said. "All right," I said. We went in. It was back to normal, and normal was all right. That was the thing. I'd been afraid, not consciously, but somewhere, that going back to school would mean losing the summer, that the structure of school days would close over the summer the way water closes over something dropped in, that I'd forget, that it would fade. It didn't. It didn't fade. The summer was in me, settled and deep, the way water gets down into the soil after long rain. It wasn't gone. It had just moved to where the deep things go. And school, back in its building, back in its rows of desks, back with its lessons and its timetable and its particular architecture of the day, school was fine, more than fine. I found, to my surprise, that I was glad to be back in some way, that the structure wasn't oppressive after the freedom, but was actually restful in its way, that there was a pleasure in knowing what came next. We are made for both things, for the open time and the structured time, for the summer with no school and the school that comes after it, for the days that have no shape and the days that have one. The summer had been so good partly because it was contrast, because the school days before it and the school days after it gave it its shape by being different. The open field is beautiful because of the trees at its edge. I thought about that for the first time in any conscious way, out sitting in my first September morning class, with the familiar smells and the familiar sounds and familiar texture of school around me. I thought the summer was partly what it was because it was free, and the freedom was what it was because it would end. Let me tell you about the autumn that followed, because I want to give you the full arc of it, the way a summer doesn't just end on a single day, but tails off through the autumn, leaving traces. September was warm that year. A warm September, a gentle one, the summer releasing its hold slowly. The mornings were cool, but by afternoon the warmth came back, a slightly thinner warmth than August's, but real warmth. The light was changing, getting lower, getting more amber, the particular autumn quality beginning its long arrival. The trees hadn't turned yet, not at the beginning of September, but you could begin to see the change coming. A few leaves going yellow at the edges, the occasional early turner, one tree in a row showing its color before the others as if impatient. On weekends, we went to our places. The creek was low by September, very low, lower than it had been at the end of August, the late summer dryness having drawn it down to its quietest. The stones of the bottom were fully visible now, in long stretches where the water was barely a trickle, and the smell of the creek was more earthy, more algal, the smell of water in small quantities. Different from the summer creek, a different mood, The orchard was in its own change. The apples were all gone by September, fallen or picked, the trees stripped. The branches were bare at the ends, and the leaves were beginning to go. That warmth draining from the leaves, that gold and rust starting at the edges and working inward. The orchard in early September had a different character, less enclosed, more transparent. You could see through it differently. The sky showed through in places that had been hidden in July. We still went. We still sat under the apple tree. We still brought sandwiches. But the afternoons were shorter now. The light went earlier, and the air cooled faster, and you couldn't lie in the grass as long before getting cold. The season was pressing in at the edges. Margot found the hedgehog. This was mid-September, and it was everything she'd hoped it would be. We were at the orchard on a Saturday afternoon, poking around in the long grass at the far end, looking for nothing in particular, just being there, doing the looking at things that we'd learned over the summer. And Margot, who was farther along the fence than the rest of us, went very still in that particular way she had when something important had happened. We all stopped, came toward her carefully. There, in the long grass at the base of the fence, in a small hollow that might have been a footprint or a natural dip in the ground, was the hedgehog. Rolled not quite tight, just resting, exploring, doing its late afternoon hedgehog business. We could see its small snout and its tiny bright eye and the way the spines formed their geometric pattern across its back. We crouched and watched it for a long time. It became aware of us eventually. Animals always do. And it rolled up, the classic defensive sphere, so perfect and complete and extraordinary. We waited, very patiently, which was not always how 4 children in a group waited, but we had learned something about patience over the summer. We had learned it from the orchard afternoons and the kingfisher vigils and the firefly watching. We knew how to be still. After some minutes, the hedgehog unrolled, slowly, tentatively, one point emerging, and then the whole arrangement of spines relaxing, and the snout coming out, and the bright eye looking. It looked at us, we looked at it. An exchange of regard, across the vast difference between its world and ours. Then it went about its business, snuffling through the grass, following whatever scent it was following. We watched it go, watched it disappear under the fence, out into whatever was on the other side. Margot let out a long, quiet breath. She reached into her pocket and brought out her collection tin and opened it. She took out a small piece of flint, a smooth, flat, oval piece, pale gray, and held it for a moment. Then she put it back and closed the tin. "What were you doing?" Theo asked. "Deciding not to take it," she said. "I thought I'd find something to keep from today. But I don't need to keep anything. I'll remember it." I've thought about that moment many times. The deciding not to take it. The understanding that not everything needs to be kept in order to be held. That memory is its own kind of keeping. That the thing itself, the hedgehog, the orchard, the afternoon, is more complete when you leave it as it is, when you don't try to possess it, when you carry only the experience and leave the evidence behind. Margot was 10 years old. She was already teaching us things. The weeks went on. October came, and with October came the full turning of the trees, the full shift of the year, the color draining and changing, and the mornings becoming properly cold. The creek came up again with the autumn rains. The orchard became skeletal, the trees bare, the long grass beaten down by rain. We still went, but less often, and with more layers on. School settled in and became our days again, the structure of it reasserting itself with its own comfortable weight. The summer became something we talked about in school, referencing it the way you reference a shared experience, saying, "Do you remember when?" And of course, and yes. We made the map better. Oliver brought it to school, carefully rolled and carried, and showed it to a teacher, a geography teacher who was also new that year, young and interested in the kind of things we'd been doing. He looked at it for a long time. He asked questions. He nodded. He said, "You made this?" "All of us," Oliver said. "You surveyed it yourself? Measured things?" "Estimated," Oliver said, in the honest way. The teacher put the map up in the classroom for a while. That felt important. The summer on the classroom wall, our summer made visible to the world. Oliver kept it eventually. He took it home at the end of the term, rolled carefully, and put it back on the wall of his study. I saw it there for years, through all the visits and the growing up, until Oliver's family moved. I don't know, as I said, what became of it after that, but it had a good life on the wall. The winter came, and the year ended, and a new year started. And the school stayed open, and we went every day, and that summer was behind us in the calendar, but never quite behind us inside. Oliver did become an engineer. I told you that. He became an engineer of bridges, specifically large bridges, the kind that cross significant gaps, the kind that people drive across without thinking about the remarkable fact of crossing a significant gap on something a person designed and built. He had the right kind of patience for it, the right kind of care, the same patience and care that had gone into drawing the raft diagram and making the map and counting the layers in the creek bank. He just applied it at a larger scale to larger problems for most of his working life. I sat on one of his bridges once, not on the bridge itself, but under it. We'd gone, the two of us, in our 40s, out to see one he'd done in the north, a pedestrian bridge over a wide river. And we walked under it, and I put my hand against one of the supporting piers, and I felt the coldness of the concrete, the solidness of it, and I thought of Theo saying, "Now it'll last." And I looked at Oliver, and I told him that, and he laughed. He laughed in that Oliver way, not his laugh exactly, because he'd never been a laugher. He smiled rather than laughed, but his version of laughing, which was a warmth that came into his face. "Theo would have been good at this," he said. "Theo, I should tell you about Theo. We kept touch, Theo and I, for most of our lives, through the various moves and changes. He went into construction. Of course he did. He worked on buildings, eventually ran his own small firm, built things that were solid and careful and that people lived in for generations. The right kind of patience, the right kind of care. He died some years ago now, not young. He'd had a good long life, but earlier than any of us would have liked. I went to his funeral on a winter day, and after, standing outside the church in the cold, I thought about him sleeping in the grass in the orchard, and I thought about the repaired raft, sound in the water, and I thought, Theo always wanted things to last. And they did. Not forever, but long enough. Long enough was always what he was after. Margot is still alive, I'm glad to tell you, still alive and still collecting things in her own way. She became a botanist, a proper one, went to university and studied plants, and spent decades working with them in various capacities. She identifies plants now, teaches about them, writes about them. She has moved away and come back and moved away again, the way people do. But she's been back in the general part of the world where we grew up for some years now, and I see her occasionally, and she is precisely herself. The braids are gone, but the eyes are the same. The noticing eyes, the eyes that go still when something important has appeared. She still has the collection tin, or one like it. She showed me once a small old tin, somewhat different from the one I remember, but the same kind of thing. She opened it and showed me what was inside: a few stones, a feather, a seed case from something, a piece of lichen from a rock somewhere. "You're still doing it," I said. "Always," she said. "What's the flint?" I asked, pointing to a pale gray oval piece. She picked it up and looked at it. "Orchard," she said. "Late September, the year of no school." She kept it after all. I looked at her. "I thought you decided not to take it." "I went back the next weekend," she said, "when no one was there. And I thought about it again, and I took it." She smiled, that small Margot smile. "Some things you have to take, and some things you leave." I got confused about which was which for a minute. Then I remembered. I held the flint. Pale gray, smooth, oval, a piece of the orchard floor, a piece of the summer. I gave it back to her. It was hers. It had always been hers. Now let me tell you about the school building itself. What became of it? The repairs took, as you might expect these things to, much longer than the letter had suggested. Not all summer, but into the autumn. There were complications, as there always are with old buildings. The roof was worse than first thought. The pipes had a story of their own. The work expanded in scope, the way building work does, each discovery leading to another. When we finally went back, that first September Monday, the building smelled different. The old smell was mostly gone. The chalk dust and floor polish were there, but under them was the smell of new materials, new plaster, something fresh and slightly chemical that didn't belong there yet, but would mellow over time. The hallways looked different, brighter, where the ceiling had been replastered and repainted. There were new pipes visible on some walls, neat and self-important. The double doors had been rehung and swung more smoothly than before. I didn't mind it, but I noticed it. The way you notice when a familiar thing has been changed, even for the better. There was a window in the main hallway that was new, a big one, replacing a smaller one that had always been a bit dark. The light came through it in a way it hadn't before, lighting up a section of the hallway that had always been in shadow. It was a better window, objectively, but I missed the shadow. I missed the particular quality of the dark corner where things had had a certain quality of being hidden. That is the thing about change, even good change. You miss the specific character of what was there before. Not because what was there before was better. Often it wasn't. Often the change is genuinely an improvement. But because what was there before was what you knew. And knowing a thing, really knowing it, means you know even its imperfections. And you've become attached to them. I've carried that window with me too. The mist shadow, the way a small dark corner in an old building is a friend of sorts. A known thing, a familiar thing. And when it's gone, even replaced by good light, there's a small loss. You make your peace. You always make your peace. The new light is good light. The repaired building serves the children who come after. The loss and the gain are both true and both real, and they sit together fine. Let me come back to the present, to now, to this chair and this room and this night. I'm old. I've told you that. Old enough to have these particular pleasures. The pleasure of sitting still, of looking back, of taking out the stored things and holding them. Old enough that the past has its own kind of vividness, that the present, for all its immediacy, sometimes doesn't quite match, but the present is good too. I want to say that. The present is good. My grandchildren come to visit. The oldest ones are 8 and 6 now, and sometimes I take them. With permission, always with permission. I learned that lesson at 7 years old, and I learned it for keeps. I take them to a field nearby, or a park with proper old trees in it, or the bank of a small river not far from here, and we sit. We look at things. We take our time. My granddaughter, the 8-year-old, the serious one who asks the questions that go sideways and make you think, she asked me once, sitting on the bank of the little river, watching the water go over the stones, "What are we waiting for?" "Nothing," I said. She looked at me. "Then why are we sitting here?" "To be here," I said. "Just here. Just this." She thought about that. She watched the water. A water beetle crossed a still patch near the bank, leaving the faintest trace on the surface. "Okay," she said after a while, and we sat. And she was there, really there. I watched it happen, that slight softening, that settling into the place. The way a child can be entirely somewhere when you give them permission to just be. When you take away the instruction to do something, when you say, "Just this." That was her version of the orchard, maybe, or the beginning of it. I hope she has a summer someday, a summer with space in it, a summer with a creek and an orchard and someone to help her make the map, or whatever the version of those things is for her time, her world. The core of it, the long free days, the places you claim as yours, the company of a few good others, the thing you build with your hands, the thing you find that you didn't expect. That core is not specific to any generation. That core is just what childhood needs, if it can have it. The open time, the permission to be small and curious and unhurried in a world that is large and patient and full of extraordinary things. The creek is still there. I know this because I went back, not once, as I mentioned with the forest, but several times over the years. The creek is still there, smaller than I remember it, as childhood places always are. The willows are different ones. They were old willows when I was there, and I suppose they're gone now, new ones in their place. But the creek itself, the particular bend of it, the particular voice it makes over the stones, that's the same. Water has its own memory, or something like it. It runs the same course it always ran. The orchard, this I'm less sure about. When I went back, the street and the fields had changed enough that I couldn't be certain I was finding it. The area I thought was right had a housing development on part of it. But at the edge of that development, past the last house, there was a garden, and in the garden there were 2 or 3 very old apple trees, gnarled and unpruned, with that gray furrowed bark I knew so well. I couldn't say for certain they were ours. But they might have been. They were old enough. They were the right kind of character. I stood at the fence and looked at them for a while. The morning light was on them. An apple tree and morning light in September is a beautiful, specific thing. And I stood there and let it be that. And I thought about Theo sleeping in the grass, and Oliver drawing his diagrams, and Margot noting the spiderweb and the fireflies in the long grass at dusk. All of it still in me. all of it pressed and preserved and still itself. I want to give you something, something to take with you into sleep, into the night, into whatever morning comes on the other side. I want to give you the feeling of lying on your back in long grass under an old apple tree on a warm July afternoon, the sky above you, blue and deep, the leaves moving a little in whatever breeze there is, the apples growing slowly above, their green going through its summer stages, the bees, the smell of warm grass and old wood and the beginning of ripening, the sound of two owls talking far off, or a bird you can't name calling from somewhere in the trees. The feeling of the earth under you, patient, solid, warm, old. The feeling of time moving slowly. The feeling of having nowhere else to be. You, here, now. The world going quietly about its business around you. The sky above, the earth below. That's what it was. That's what the summer was. That is what I want to give you. You were a child once. You might remember moments of that kind, or you might not exactly those moments, but something like them. The particular quality of a good afternoon in summer when you were young and the time was open and the place was yours. The smell of something, the sound of something, the ground under your back or your hands. All of that is still in you. The past is not gone. The past is right there in the back rooms, the deep rooms, the rooms that don't need light because they already have their own, stored up from years ago and tonight, right now, in this quiet, in this dark, in this good hour. Those rooms are open, just a little, just enough to let a little warmth out. The summer warmth, the creek and the orchard and the raft and the fireflies and the apple you ate in August that tasted of the whole summer. Just let it come. Don't try to hold it. Let it come the way warmth comes, through you, not to you, through. Let it go through and leave behind what it leaves behind, which is a kind of peaceful knowing, a kind of warmth that settles in the chest, a kind of certainty that things were good once and are good still and will be good again in the ways they are good and in the ways that haven't happened yet. You breathe in and slow out, in and slow. The linden trees at the end of our street were full of their sweet, late smell. The nights were warm. The curtains moved in the breeze from the open window. The whole long summer ahead. We had no school. We had each other. We had the creek and the orchard and all the days. We had all the days. I'm going to go quiet now. I'm going to let the story settle around you like warm water, like a blanket, like the weight of good years resting gently. The fire is embers. The clock goes on. The night outside is full of its good, deep September approaching dark. The raft is on the bank. The map is on the wall. The apple tree is in the orchard, and its apples are growing slow and sweet in the dark and the warmth. The creek goes over its stones. The kingfisher sleeps somewhere in its particular tree, dreaming whatever kingfishers dream. The hedgehog goes about its important nighttime business in the long grass. Oliver's apple pip is in his pocket. Margot's flint is in her tin. And the summer, the whole long, beautiful summer, is in you now, right here, right in the soft, warm middle of you, where the real things are kept. Go easy now. Go slow. Let the breathing do the rest. The summer is still there. It always will be. Sleep well. Sleep well.